Hey everybody, and welcome back to another tier list video. This time around we're gonna start looking at tonks. A lot of people have been asking for this, and I decided to do logistics first, so the most boring part, or maybe the second most boring part, is not gonna be last. But yeah, today we're gonna take a look at tonks, a lot of people's favorite tab, and certainly an important one. I would say the most important one is infantry, but that is not part of the series, so let's start rating them, I'd say, yes? I don't think there's really anything special towards rating tanks compared to other tabs. So yeah, let's get into it. Starting off quite strong with the AMX-13 FL15. Hopefully this did not show. Okay, it did not show up. I just got a message on Steam. AMX-13 FL15. An incredibly strong tank. What of course the unit card does not show is the actual rate of fire. So while I'm trying to fill some dead air while I'm opening the armory tool, it shows 13 RPM, but it's not just 13 RPM like all the time. It's maybe on average per minute, but technically speaking, the actual practical rate of fire is much higher. If you had, let's say if the Leopard 1 had 13 RPM, a normal, quote-unquote normal tank, you'd have a reload time of like something like 4 point something seconds, 4.5 or something like that, right? But that's not how this tank works. How this tank actually works is that it has a magazine, so to speak, of 12 shots. And these 12 shots, it shoots with a reload time of 3 seconds. And after it shot those 12 shots, it has to reload for 20 seconds. 1 second. And I'm back without you even noticing I was gone. Yeah, it shoots 12 rounds with 3 seconds in between, so incredibly strong rate of fire. Couple that with good range, good accuracy, acceptable AP. It's fine for what it does, but the range and accuracy combined with that crazy rate of fire, 3 HE. Front armor is of course not amazing, but the damage it can dish out, especially against infantry and IFVs, is just amazing. It's one of the best fire support vehicles in the game. The only downside is, I mean, it's not really that much of a downside, but it being in the tank tab for some other decks might be a bit awkward. For Dutch German decks, I would say it's not that hard to fit in. Because you really only need 2 or 3 tanks. Other than that, the 2A4 you really want in 1 versus 1s. In team games, of course, you probably want like 2 cards of 2A5s and something like that. I say in team games it's probably harder to fit in than in 1 versus 1s. But I would also say that in 1 versus 1s it is more important than in team games. But I'm going off track here. In any case, incredibly strong medium range fire support. And again, not just against infantry, but against basically anything that isn't a proper tank. Just don't fire or don't engage enemy units at point blank range. In deep forests, that's where it's gonna really struggle against lots of infantry and IFVs. It is not that cheap, right? It's not like in 50-point IFV. So don't be too over aggressive, but we're really starting off strong here. But yeah, this autoloader thingy is a big deal. Oh yeah, and the thing I should mention, but once we get to it, units with the exact same name I will not write down multiple times this time around. The Harpoon, on the other hand, it's just so much worse. I mean, obviously the ATGM is basically worthless. I mean, sure, 17 AP, 2550 meter range on like a 25-point unit, not inherently bad. But then you have to keep in mind, it's 35% accuracy. Excuse me for a second. Jesus. 35% accuracy. It's a very slow missile. And of course, it can't fire the missile and gun at the same time because that's how it works. So the missile, for all intents and purposes, is just worthless. The gun, it is kinetic, which is kind of nice, but if you compare it to this one, it has 350 meter lower range, 15% lower accuracy, 6 lower AP, but honestly, most importantly, only 2 HE. 33% lower HE output, even if ignoring accuracy and range, right? Which then lowers it even further. It is much easier to kill because it can't defend itself nearly as well against IFVs, which would be the main threat otherwise, outside of like medium tanks and stuff like that. So I don't think it is quite easier, but it performs even worse than it might look. Is all I have to say. AMX-10 RCSP. I think it's easy S tier, but I don't need to explain this. But I'm gonna make it blue. Why blue? Oh my god, I did it again. Why blue? Well, it's certainly not a rare unit by any means. However, just due to the fact that the recon tab version of the AMX-10 exists, means that especially in Europe, or well, all decks that have access to this one, which is nearly all decks that also have access to recon tab outside of armor decks, right? Because the recon tab does most of the time the same job as this one, but cheaper and very often also better, this one is not seen as often. This one is mostly used if you want like some fairly cheap, high AP mobile, gun. On its own, again, is still amazing, but the stealth, the optics, and the lower price on the recon tab version make it just so much more versatile. And if usually for AT purposes, you very often use different units that are not as squishy, because especially against like rocket bot helicopters, they kind of struggle. Where once again the stealth on the recon tab version helps. But yeah, just because the recon tab version exists means you don't see it as often as you would otherwise. Again, not saying nobody ever uses it. It's certainly used, but yeah, I think you get the point that I'm trying to bring across here. AMX-30, the basic one without an autocannon. Heat on tanks is already pretty bad. It's just plain 9 RPM, no autoloader shenanigans or anything like that. It is decently mobile for 30 points. Has acceptable armor, but like not my T-55s at 25 points already have 7 armor. It gets one shot by 20 AP heat already, so like Spets and Screw already start one-shotting you. Has just no real role. Every now and then some people like saying, they like cheap heat slingers, but this one is not even cheap, right? Like 10 point heat guns from the vehicle tab or something. I can sort of get where they're coming from when they're saying, oh, just spam like lots of them and just, one by one deal a little bit of damage to super heavies, but for this, it's just not good. Just not good. And then the problem is, again, with heat, you're even gonna struggle against IFVs. Anything above 1 armor, you will need at least 3 shots, right? To one-shot 2 armor with heat, you need 10 AP heat. You need 3 shots at any given range to kill a full HP 2 armor vehicle. 3 shots, even if you're firing at a point, this is just absolutely horrible. If it had at least 10 AP, which would honestly not change its ranking, but if it had at least 10 AP, it would at least be able to one-shot 2 armor transports. But needing 3 shots even against it can't even one-shot 1 armor transports, right? I for some reason only just realized I was too hung up on the fact that it can't even double tap 2 armor. 9 AP heat is just laughable for 30 points. Still, it doesn't make it like utterly worthless if this was your only option in the tank tab, which is why it's gonna be D tier. Like, if this was your only like affordable tank or affordable unit with more than like 2 armor and a gun that has AP, then yes, it would be valuable in some sense. But my oh my, AMX-30B, it is better, but it still has freaking 9 AP. The autocannon means that let me put it this way, you're probably better off using this unit unless you're like shooting at infantry at long ranges or something, or you. Let me put it this way: as long as you're in autocannon range, just turn off your main gun and just use your autocannon. You're probably better off. That's all I have to say. Now you at least have 12 AP, and you have kinetic, right? This one is still heat. This one is kinetic at least, 12 AP. I've said this in the deck game video. Actually, incredible accuracy, medium optics, 40 points. It's not too shabby, honestly. Once again, I didn't mention this, but in case you don't know, all the AMX tanks here, they cannot use main gun and autocannon at the same time. Only one at a time. If you want to use your autocannon, either there has to be a helicopter engaging you, and your main gun isn't already engaged in something else, then it'll automatically use the autocannon against the helicopter. Or you turn off your main gun. Or of course you have no ammunition. But otherwise it will not use its autocannon. If you're engaged against a tank and a helicopter flies towards you, only the NF1 will shoot. If an infantry is right in front of you, only the F1 will shoot. Only the main gun will shoot. Unless it's turned off or has no ammo. And of course the MG will shoot as well. So yeah, if both shot, it would honestly be a pretty decent tank. Not amazing, but decent at least. But right now, I mean, it's not worthless. I think just the fact that it has medium optics for 40 points, good range, amazing accuracy, give the tank a, I wouldn't say a good role, but like far from like, oh my god, what is this garbage unit, you know? I think Brennus is in somewhat of a similar camp. I mean, they're actually like very interesting side grades in a sense to Leopard 1A5 and 1A4. The Brennus gets 1 more AP but loses the stabilizer and loses 1 RPM compared to the 1A5. Also, of course, has the autocannon that is not nearly as useful as it would otherwise be. But I think it's also C tier. Now, if you had nothing else available, then it could be good for like low intensity flanks. But the thing is, these days, all like the sub, let's say, most of the sub 80-ish point tanks are just not very hard, or like very many of them are just not that great, because the way the game works is not only will you see a lot of medium and heavy tanks, but a lot of the engagements are in fairly close range, so many tanks, heavy tanks will just one-shot you, and very often it's very easy to get into infantry and tank range, right? And that's why they're just so hard to utilize. And on open fields, then again, there's gonna be the heavy tanks just reigning supreme. So many of these cheap tanks, just with how the meta has been for the past 4 or 5 years, many of them just are hard to really utilize. It's just, yeah. AMX-32. You lose 1 armor over the Brennus, I guess because it has no ERA or something. 120mm gun, of course, if you have more range. You actually have a stabilizer for now. It's not amazing, but any stabilizer is better than no stabilizer. Even if you're attack moving, because it means you aim a split second earlier. Once again, of course, cannot use autocannon at the same time. Still 9 RPM. The gun is, in and of itself, of course, is good. Very good for 70 points. Alright, it's 18 AP, 9 RPM, 70 points. Chef's kiss. However, once again, the armor is letting you down, and 10 armor means you will get one-shot by a lot of stuff. The enemy will only need to be at 28 AP, meaning that, you know, stuff like 84As don't even have to be at forest range to one-shot you. VDV will one-shot you, Eric's will one-shot you, RBS 56, Milan F3's, Peace Runs, etc. will one-shot you. Once again, because stuff like that is just so abundant these days, makes it just tough to really utilize this tank. Well, but at the same time, it's far from worthless. But, you know, it's just how the game is played these days. And if you want to try hard, then it's not the best, not an amazing tank. Which I think I didn't mention a whole lot, but of course these rankings, you know, shouldn't necessarily stop you from using tanks. Just, you know, if you want to actually try hard, you should be aware of, you know, what is like actually a good unit. MX-40 is in a similar camp. If it had 13 armor, this is one of those things that can be really frustrating at Wargame. There are a couple of units. MX-40 is one of those. As there's some T-72Ms as well. Just a single armor point, and it would just completely change the way the unit is played. Like, okay, completely is a bit of an exaggeration maybe, but like vastly change the unit. suddenly you wouldn't get one shot by any tank in forest anymore. Suddenly you could survive a shot of a missile of a peace run. Boombar, RBS 56, but most of the 26 AP heat missiles are like peace run and A10, but still there are a couple around. But most importantly, you wouldn't just suddenly get one shot by tanks in forests, especially heavy tanks, most notably heavy tanks. It would just again just change the unit completely. It probably would be quite a noticeable threat to stuff like 84As, because it's just 15 points cheaper if it was 13 AP. With the same AP, it would also reach the 30 AP cap in forest engagement ranges. So it would suddenly be like I would say A tier tank with 13 armor. With the way it is now, it is again far from useless. A decent, acceptable medium tank, but with DLC happening in the having happened, and just the general increase, or like much higher armor tiers that came from ALB to Wargame, and a much higher abundance of high-end anti-tank weaponry on infantry. While I'm not an expert of ALB and I haven't played it a whole ton, that is one of those things that just suddenly made it a lot of mid and lower end tanks just suddenly so much weaker. Then again, vehicle tab 80 gems also like Tau 2. I think wasn't it like in Allen battle like Bradley spam actually pretty strong. In any case, Centurion 84mm. Not that horrible of a tank, actually decent fire support. Like, can I just say that I find it a bit funny that this 25-point tank has nearly as much armor as this AMX-32. How realistic it is, I have no clue, but I still just find it a bit funny. It's not a horrible fire support tank. The main issue is just its speed. 25 points for 9 armor, 8 RPM, 3 HE gun with acceptable range and acceptable accuracy. A 50 cal, once again, don't underestimate the 50 cals on tanks, especially if they're cheap, how much of an impact they can have. Yeah, but it's just massively held back by the speed, which is probably good. If it had like actually good speed of like 60 km or upwards, it might be like, I wouldn't say like, wouldn't just suddenly change the meta, but it would massively improve it. Yeah. A bit hesitant what I should give this, but I think it's still just C tier because that speed is just hurting it so much. Not being able to like hunt down IFVs and such, or infantry that is at the edge of forest and then trying to evade it. But if this thing can't hunt down anything in forest other than like panicked line infantry and stuff like that. They will just run away because it's so goddamn slow. Centurion Mk.5. Honestly, it's just a downgrade for the most part. It's still slow, a bit faster, but yeah, it gets a better gun. But like with 11 AP, like it gets extra accuracy, extra range, extra AP, extra stabilizer. But once again, for what this is supposed to do, the 10-point upgrade is just not worth it, right? You don't need extra AP. I mean, of course, it'd be nicer, but paying 10 points for the extra range, extra accuracy, extra AP, just not worth it. Even the 5k match is not going to make a big difference. So this suddenly makes it actually a worse tank. Pound for pound. Or point for point. Same with this one, really. Still very slow. Still no medium optics means that it's even gonna be awkward and like low intensity flanks, right? Just like the AMX-30, or not just like, but tanks like the AMX-30B2. What they are useful for is sides of the map, especially in 1v1s. Let's say you're playing Highway to Seoul, right? And you push, the fight is happening in the zones between the two secondary spawns, right? Where it mostly happens around the main highway. Then you have to your other side, in the middle of the map, if you look at it from the top view, you have the plateau, right, with the 2 1-pointers. Well, most of the time it's just not much happening, maybe some skirmishes. But this is where like tanks like this excel, right? They're affordable, they have medium optics, and good enough guns and armor so that they will deal with like IVs that might try to just poke around and stuff like that. And in a pinch, or if you get a bit lucky with how they engage, will even deal with AMX-10s, right? Because they have better armor, better guns, and with the medium optics, if they're engaging you in open ranges because they're maybe just being attacked move or something, you can actually spot them. Or if they're close enough, even if they're in the forest. This is where these tanks are good at. And this is why this one is not good, because it doesn't have medium optics and it's also pretty slow. And that was my TED Talk. Centurion Mk.5/2-DK. Amazing name. This is just actually worse than the Danish one. There's also, let me just briefly show this to you. Centurion, right? Look at this one. This one has 24-18. I mean, this one has a different gun and one less main round, which I would just, I mean, okay, the different MG, of course, makes sense. You know, this is just how it was, IRL and stuff, right? But for some reason, the Danish one has one extra main gun round. This has to be a mistake. If not, then someone please enlighten me. Also, has more MG ammo than the Canadian one. Once again, enlighten me if this is actually true. If you know. But then of course this one has also worse availability for no reason, and this one has a normal availability. It's just I mean, it really doesn't matter, but it's just showing how all over the place some of the stuff is in Wargame. Also, this one has side skirts and doesn't get any extra armor. I mean, I know that, or I think that most of the side skirts didn't really add a whole lot of protection. Anyway, back to the tonks. We are this one, once again. Actually, the browning just does make a significant difference, you know? It actually does. Does it make a difference to push this down to D tier? I don't think so. Because I would say the Centurion 85mm is already quite at the top of C tier, like scratching at the B tier. Like, let me in, but it's not, nobody's letting it in, so it's gonna stay at C. Leopard AS1, very interesting unit. Uses a bunch. I'm still not 100% certain how I feel about this, but 35 points for medium optics, mobile, 8 armor, acceptable gun. Not amazing with only 1900 meter range, right? The AMX-30 has 2100, but it's also cheaper. It has a stabilizer, it has better armor. You don't hear that every time, right? That the Leopard one has a better armor than something else. But it's not bad. Not bad at all. What's B tier? Strong units. If skipped, then it is mainly due to not fitting player's playstyle or because of other units fitting the same role. C, niche units or types mostly used in spec decks. I think it's still like more of a niche unit. It is just more seen, I think, in the Commonwealth, because in Commonwealth you don't have stuff like, you know, the typical AMX-10, Blazer, Isvidyaj, T-55, right? You don't have these relatively cheap but strong enough recon fighting vehicles that most other decks have, and that's why it's not used that much. Because I think in this case the AMX-30B2 might still be better, because then you have like an actually good gun, right, for the price. Same with the Leopard 1A4, which we'll get to later on. But 11 AP and not that great range is kind of holding it back. But then again, it's pretty cheap. Which is why I would probably prefer this over, let's say, the AMX-30B2 in the Commonwealth. But in other decks I might not, because then I have something like a 25 or 30 point recon vehicle that can fill that role, and if I want a better gun, then I can take that instead. AS1 Plus, good tonk. I wouldn't say quite A tier once again, because just the way the game is played. But it's one of those light tanks that is actually certainly viable. So, yeah, so period. Just certainly viable. It's like 16 AP, 10 RPMs, amazing accuracy, good stabilizer, full range, fast, medium optics. Once again, only at armor, so we'll just get one shot by anything with 22 AP heat or above, or 26 AP kinetic or above. So not quite at max range against super heavies, but once you're a bit closer, you will just get popped instantly. And as all Leopards, you know, virtually no side armor, so you also have to be very, very careful against rocket bot helicopters. They will still deal significant damage up front and just actually kill you from the side. No joke. But for 55 points, such a gun, it's hard to beat. And again, compared to the AMX-10, this fills a similar role to the AMX-10, right? You get like a 3 or 4 stack and just try to hunt down medium tanks that if you're not too close, will not one-shot you, but then you just bam, 4 shots and the tank is dead. And of course for the 10 RPM. And the AMX-10 of course has a similar thing, but you're just much faster. But you of course also lose a stabilizer. But the Leopard AS1 Plus is certainly a formidable tank. I wouldn't be surprised if some people would think it's A tier or would rank it A tier themselves. I don't think it's quite there. I think there's not a whole lot of tanks in this price range that are A tier or even S tier. We saw the AMX-10 and the AMX-13, but for like such quote unquote normal tanks to be so high, they'd have to be just straight up OP. It's just with how the game is usually played. There's too many counters to them, and counters that are not hard counters or like that aren't just counters, but VDV 90 and Legion 90, they're just very good in general and just happen to also one-shot these kind of tanks as a nice bonus. Centurion Mk.5. Since there's a slightly different name, I will write it down. But I don't know if you come to the T-72s, etc., not und etc. Yeah, Mk.6. No, it's not worth 5 points. I'll stand by it. Mk.11, yeah, it doesn't even get the extra speed that the other 35 point gets. Centurion gets. This one is just actually horrible. Mk.7. I played actually around with this, but it's just 35 points. The speed is just because you also have to they have to be fairly close to the front end and have to move up with the infantry as well. John Maho, 25 points, 6 armor. It has 6 RPM only, but it has 3 HE. 13 AP kinetic isn't too shabby for 30 points. It has a KPVT with the base on with 10% accuracy. It has 1 AP, it has a 1400 meter range compared to a Browning that has 1000, right? 1050. Yep. So if you're, especially in forest, it will just munch, somewhat deal with 5 pointers and stuff like that while your main gun is reloading. It is not that fast, but not as bad as Centurions. But what really holds it down is just once the 6 RPM, and with 6 armor, you are still not that hard to kill. Again, 20 AP heat will just easily one-shot you. Of course, you're 25 points, right? But the Centurion for 25 points doesn't even get one-shot by a spike. And when it comes to dealing with infantry, just has a better gun because you have 8 RPM versus 6. You have a Browning, which I think there are ranges where the Browning is better than the basic KPVT with 10% accuracy, but I'm not 100% certain. But the Browning is not necessarily a downgrade. But for this role, I'd probably just prefer the Centurion Mk.5, which already isn't that amazing. But at the same time, I just don't have a whole lot of experience with these. But whenever I tried any of the John Mahos, it wasn't the 5. I was just so disappointed. But yeah, I think the main thing that this gets is really the kinetic power, right? 13 kinetic is strong for 25, but not necessarily what you need. It's a bit overkill. I think you'd much rather have additional RPM or more armor. And if you spam cheap tanks, you generally want higher to fire or the very least high armor, but 6 armor just isn't that high for it to be survivable enough. Yeah. John Maho 2, it does have it looks, I don't know, it looks so completely different with just the different camo, the smoke launchers and the side skirts, but you can't even see this, I forgot. Anyway, 16 AP for 40 points. You get an extra range step as well. Some more armor, some more accuracy. You still have only poor optics. And 40.6 in AP, not that bad. 18 AP mean 8 armor, excuse me, means you will survive a spike shot. And a Jumat as well, as a result. Although Jumat not actually, I guess it's used in mixed blue, so it is somewhat common. I have to admit, I don't have a lot of experience with this, so I'm not 100% certain how to rate this. I could see it not being too bad. Because at close ranges, this is actually a threat to many tanks, most notably medium tanks. You will get 10 extra AP in forest engagements, so you get 26 AP kinetic. You will two-shot basically any medium. Anything up to 18 hours. I might be inclined to actually give this a C tier. Kind of like benefit of the doubt, because once again, not the most experienced when it comes to the Chamaho, the lower end lines. So I might be overrating this a bit. And maybe I'm underrating the basic one, right? But yeah. Given that I don't remember anyone, and there are people who experiment a lot, right? I don't know if you think I'm someone who experiments not at all or not, but there are people who experiment certainly more than me. And I still haven't seen anyone like make these suddenly work a whole lot. But of course, it doesn't mean it's, you know, automatically bad. In any case, John Maho 4, 20 points. You get medium optics, you get more range, more AP, more accuracy, more stabilizers, although the stabilizers garbage. You get a lot more armor. You get this, and of course, you get this Strela 2M. Haha, very funny. Thanks, Eugene, for removing softcore and giving North Korea such an amazing tank. Oh, it was so worth it. Finally, Red Dragons is playable. Not. Probably the biggest stroke of the entire game. I mean, yes, people have been asking for Eugene, give man pet on North Korean tanks, you know. And in like one of the last patches, Newton did it, and then it's like utterly worthless, and the Dragons are still in a garbage state. Well done, Eugene. But of course, you know, this happened like over 3 years ago by now. But as we all know, Wargame players never forget, never forgive. I'm just kidding. Back to this. Still the basic KPVT. I think they all have the basic one, huh? If they had the 20% KPVT, you know, like used on the BTR80, that would actually, especially on the 5 one, actually make a huge difference. You still have that 6 RPM. You're still pretty slow. You have the medium optics, but once again, 12 armor. But I mean, for 60 points, 17 AP at full range with acceptable or good accuracy. No joke. And in an armor deck, the Strela 2M will actually be kind of nice. Especially if you have 2 or 3 around, you will at least be able to deal with like man pits and such. I guess you might get a lucky hit on something like a plane flying above, right? If you're lucky. And then, you know, but then the other issue is you don't have like any SAMs available in armored, right? And is this a prototype? Is that a prototype? It is. It is. There's one more, right? This one, also prototype. But unfortunately, none of the armored A pieces are any like SAMs that deal like 7 or more damage. You only have like Strelas, so you have to bank on the specs to deal. I mean, yeah, I mean it's not unlikely that specs do like 7 damage or like barely leave the plane alive, but you don't have like, you know, the book or something combination of like that dealing damage and then your cheap low HE A systems like Scratch Heads, for example, which just finish it off. So yeah. But honestly, it's certainly not useless. It's certainly fun. It's a nice meme and all. It's just too bad that Red Dragons is a garbage. John Mk.5. Acceptable medium tank. Good AP. It has decent armor, although the 16 AP threshold is not. No. I mean, it will make you survive 2 Appalus shots, but at 16 AP, you will still get double tapped by 24 AP and above. You have just enough armor to not survive a 30 AP heat missile, where 17 AP is needed. You still get double tapped by Peace Drop Rhines, of course. So 16 armor is like, it's like the, you know, there's I don't know if it's said the same way in German, but like the unlucky fourth place, you know. You have on paper like against other tanks like good armor, but then again it's like not an important threshold against heat at all. You know, just one more armor, there would be a noticeable improvement. Like 16 to 17 AP is a much bigger difference than 15 to 16 is what I'm trying to say here. But of course, you know, all in all, acceptable medium tank, held back by its speed. It's a bit faster with 55 over 50. It also has 8 RPM now because it has a fancy new 115mm gun. Actually, it's still 115. I thought, didn't they change it? Wasn't it supposed to be a 125mm gun by the Soviets or something? In any case, a fancy new loading system, I suppose. Probably fantasy and made up in some sense. It's one of the latest changes in Wargame, so I'm pretty sure they forgot to change some stuff. But in any case, acceptable medium tank. Got bullied out of the marine specializations because some people got butthurt and, you know, made Dragon's Marine, which was at least a funny deck, just a useless deck now. But it's once again just never forgive, never forget. I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's an acceptable medium. It's once again just like so many units in dragons that on paper might not look that bad, but there's just this one thing that just suddenly holds them down. And here it is, the speed. It holds down medium tanks more than one might think. I think it is certainly better than the other Chunmahos. I think it deserves a beat here. I think it does deserve the beat here. Oh, the challengers. Oh, the challengers. They're so sad. Once again, just low speed, low RPM is just such a bad combination. It's just not as bad as it is on the Chieftain line, which I'll get to in a bit, but this is just this is a tank that just gets bullied, right? You go up against an M84A, for example, at medium range or something. You both trade a shot. You want to go back while you're reloading, but you're so slow that it just keeps coming closer and closer. While it's reloading and gets another shot in, and suddenly you're shaken, you have worse accuracy, and the next shot's gonna have worse reload time, and you're just sitting there and like, I can't do anything. While you shoot another round, the enemy tank is not dead, but meanwhile, he nearly got his third shot ready, shoots, you're still reloading, it shoots again, and you're dead, and you got 2 shots against 4. You know, it's just, of course, you know, you don't only go up against 84As, but it's just so frustrating, because on paper it might look like really good, right? 19 AP is a nice threshold. You survive double taps of peace rounds, for example, really strong. You don't get one shot by 30 AP missiles. The VDV-90 will need 3 shots to kill you. Yeah, 19 AP for 105 points is so good, but like low RPM, 55 kmh is so bad. Just once again, a tank that before the DLCs, I don't think it was amazing anymore. But just with 84A suddenly roaming the area, and just the speed overall of the game increasing, you know, with AMX-10s, KTs, Tigers. Not like Tigers got really changed, but I think it's more like they got discovered. Not by me. I wasn't the first one to suddenly realize how strong the Tiger is. Was certainly someone else. I was pretty late on the train, in fact. But yeah, the Challenger one didn't change, but everything else around it did, in a sense, and it just hurt it a lot. And it hurts me. It hurts me a lot as well, because Commonwealth used to be one of my favorite decks. Playstyle wise as well, right? Because I'm a fairly rigid, slowish player, right? Predictable as well, but conservative, and it just suited my playstyle pretty well, I'd say. At least back then. But yeah, once again, it's just it's certainly not useless. And I'm pretty sure like some decks would love to have it, because they have even worse tanks available in this area at least, or non-tanks. Red Dragons, or Blue Dragons even, right? Between the K1 and the Q model, they have like except the K1 is the only the only tank in Blue Dragons that has like above average armor for its price. Yeah. Mark II is in the same camp. These days, I might actually say it's better, even though 15 points for 2 AP in this price range is not really that good. If you compare it to some other tanks, but just at least getting to 30 AP in forest engagements will make it better in these engagements, but doesn't like suddenly change its unit. The Mark III is fine. Mark III is a decent heavy tank because it gets extra RPM. It's quite tanky. For the price, it's not even that amazing for the price, right? If you compare to, I would say like this in this price range, like the HA Abrams is like a good compared, like if you compare to the HA Abrams, the Challenger 1 Mark III. Let's see. Let me briefly turn this off so I can see here. Right, you get a bit more accuracy, you lose stabilizer, but let's say they're more or less even. It's not a huge. Oh, you actually don't get accuracy, you just lose stabilizer. You lose the 50 cal. You are significantly slower, which means that your autonomy automatically is also worse, because autonomy is a timer, not a range. You get 3 side armor. You get 2 rear armor. Side armor is not, especially like 8 versus 11, certainly a difference. But you gain extra AP but lose RPM. Where in this case, I would definitely say that RPM is worth more, but you have to pay for this, right? It's not a huge deal, but I think the HA is certainly better than the Mark III. But the Mark III is still very decent, certainly. Nothing to scoff at. Certainly not groundbreaking, but just a very solid heavy tank. Challenger 2. I used to be of the opinion that this was the best super heavy. There's 2 reasons for that. One, it's 3 per card, and it definitely shouldn't be, but it is. The other one is the only one with 23 AP. There was nearly a super heavy with 24 AP, which we'll get to when we are there. But it's the only one with 23 AP or higher. There's nothing higher. Also has still the 11 side armor. By the way, 11 side armor protects you at full HP from a VDV 90 side shot. It actually happened to me that an LSCR squad side shot at Challenger 2 of mine. It survived, and I managed to get it out and repair it back to full HP. Super heavies these days are of course important, especially in team games. They are somewhat invaluable. You certainly don't have to use super heavies. Mech decks, motor decks still very viable. But I think unless you're playing something like D-Day or like a fairly close quarter map or small map or something with very few open areas, then if you want to try hard, you really want at least one deck with super heavies. In 1 versus 1, certainly playable to play. Certainly possible to win without super heavies. I would still like them. But there's people who just very rarely use super heavies, and they're still very good. Putin comes to mind, right? He doesn't use a whole lot of super heavies. Every now and then he does, but not very often. And he's beating me more often than I beat him. So clearly super heavies are not needed. But of course it doesn't mean also at the same time that they're useless. Not by any means. But I think people very often seem to have the opinion, or some people seem to have the opinion, that 1 versus 1 is just about super heavies, everything else is useless. It's far from the truth. Yes, they are incredibly strong and sort of a must-have in team games. But once again, unless the whole team doesn't have them, it's not that important. Only some should have them, I guess I should say. And like I said, it kind of depends on the map as well. But in 1 versus 1, certainly not important. And this is also something that you have to keep in mind when looking at this. And maybe I should make a mention at below. The tank tab is a tab that is one of the tabs that probably differs the most when between 1v1s and team decks. 1v1s, it's so much more about medium tanks. Team games, it's so much more about heavy tanks. Because you have generally a lot more points to spend on a more narrow area of the map. You generally have to cover a lot less ground, so it's a lot easier to keep, to not get flanked and like overrun on a different side of the map, and suddenly you have a heavy tank on an area that can't do anything anymore because there's nothing to do and you can't push properly. Do I have this? Yeah, okay. And this is why I'm kind of conflicted. It's certainly A tier. What I didn't mention in downside, it is I think the slowest super heavy, tied with the Mk.5, I believe, 60 kmh. In general, not slow, but it somewhat hurts the whole getting in and out of cover, smoke clouds, whether you like it or not. But it takes a bit more time to get back into cover. Which certainly is noticeable, especially when you compare to a VHO or something like that. But it's 60 kmh is still fast. Funnily enough, I think the fastest British tank that isn't like a Scorpion or something. Like every Challenger, every Chieftain is slower, right? Look at how slow they all are. But I think since this also, of course, does cover team games, I think this is S tier. And I think the fact that just Commonwealth outside of the Mexas doesn't have any amazing tanks means you kind of have to use a Challenger too, and not have to use, but have to put in your deck, because what else would you put in there? And it's just the 23 AP 11 side armor just makes it so tanky. It's kind of disgusting. And I will put in S tier. The fact that it's 3 per card in 1v1, not really a big deal. In team games, most certainly is. In team games, Commonwealth is still a decent deck. I would definitely not say top tier. In some decks it might, some maps it might be, but in general it's still not top tier in team games by any means. But in team games where tanks are so much more important, having a Challenger 2 and like 2 cards of Mark 3s massively improved the deck in team game matchups. Charioteer, oh baby, it's one amazing fire support tank, 5 armor for 15 points, 8 RPM, 3 AT gun. Not like incredibly slow. It's not particularly fast, but it's pretty fast still. But like 5 armor for 15 points, I don't think there's anything that's like up to that level, right? Like T-34 even has 3. They all have, none of them have like more than. Okay, the M48 has 5, the 20.1, but it's 20 points, not 15. Oh, there's the Chinese one, right? The Rokuichi. Yeah, this one has 6. We get to that later. But there's not much. I guess there's one unit at least that can keep up or even surpass it in that sense. But it's 40% is also pretty good for 15 points. Has good autonomy, which certainly plays a role for cheap fire support. Or I should say that cheap fire support tends to have pretty bad autonomy very often. So it's something you have to keep in mind. But more than good enough autonomy. It's fast enough. 5 armor, good range for the price. Good accuracy for the price. 3 AT, 8 RPM, also very good for the price. If it had a 50 cal, it'd be busted as fuck. It is already arguably busted as fuck, but it's easily A tier. I would certainly not. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't fight too hard with someone or argue too hard with someone who says no, this is S tier. I most definitely can see where they would be coming from. Chieftain Mk.2. Chieftain Mk.2 is kind of sad. Maybe you've seen me use it in a deck game recently where it got bullied at point blank range by a Martyr 2. Not very fun. Another thing, that the Chieftain is even more hurt by the speed than the Centurions or Challengers are. Because the Challenger, again, they at least tend to have above average armor. I think except for the Mark 3, they all have pretty good armor for the price, or like very good armor for the price even. The Chieftains, the lower end Chieftains, I think also have decent armor, not amazing. The Chieftain Mk.5 not so much, but I think Chieftain Mk.2, 35 points for 11 armor is I think pretty good. At 40 kmh and 300 kilometers autonomy is very big yikes. Once again, the autonomy is a timer, right? So it doesn't mean that you can drive 300 kilometers with 40 km/h. It means you can drive 300 seconds with 40 km/h, or 110 if you're on road. And if you have good off-road speed, 300 kilometers isn't that horrible on a cheap unit. If you have horrible off-road speed, it is pretty horrible. It massively hurts this tank, especially given that it's more of a medium to close range tank, not really a long range, even though it has good accuracy, but only 1900 meter range as well, not even 2100. Then again, it's 35 points, so what do you expect? But that off-road speed and autonomy absolutely kill this unit. No joke. It hurts the unit so much. Mk.5 is better. It has a lot more autonomy. It's also a bit faster. Has amazing accuracy and good range. It's a decent tank. No medium optics is a bit awkward, but 14 AP, good range. That will scale pretty well. 7 RPM though is unfortunately not auto-loaded. One thing I forgot to mention, all the British tanks have 4HE. The only Blue 4 tank line that has 4HE, Chieftain and Challenger, as well as the Chimera, I believe. Which is pretty unique for 120mm guns. Because of hash rounds, funny, I don't know. I think that's the reasoning. Why did it make sense? No clue. It is a decent tank. I think that's all there is to say. Even though it has poor optics, it is nice for like flanks because it has pretty good armor. There's not a whole Blue 4 tends to not have good armor for cheap outside of the chieftains. Really, you don't have the T72 lines. You only have like M48s and Leopard 1s for the most part. The Centurions are good for like the cheap ones, but the more expensive ones don't have that great armor anymore. They mostly get like gun upgrades. But the Chieftain line, or the lower end Chieftains, the higher end not so much anymore again, but lower ends have pretty good price armor for the price. And Chieftain Mk.5 is certainly a playable tank, easily. Mk.10. I think Mk.10 and 11, they especially the Mk.11 really hurt by the speed. Not only of course because the chieftains tend to have the best autonomy either, but they're peekaboo tanks, right? They have high AP, good range, good accuracy, low RPM. In and of itself, not inherently an issue. When does it become an issue? If you can't retreat, right? If with these tanks you want to shoot and retreat while reloading, because most of the other tanks that you go up against will just out-reload you. And in terms of Red 4, they also have an autoloader, so even if they're panicked, they will out-reload you. Or rather, if you're panicked, you will have to wait even longer. The problem is, of course, you move out, attack move, which means that you will not stand still exactly at the point where you suddenly have line of sight, right? You will always drive a good bit further, and there's not much you can do about it. Unless you like really micromanage, like right click, move up and immediately press stop, then you could of course just get at the sweet spot where if you just reverse 5 meters you immediately broke line of sight, but it's just not feasible. So you will attack move like out of a forest or towards the edge of a forest. As soon as you get line of sight, you will start decelerating, stand still, finish aiming, shoot, bam, right? But with a low speed, you will just take so long to reverse that the enemy will basically guaranteed, unless it's in the process of moving, and because it's suddenly gonna be behind a building or a forest, will not have line of sight anymore. Outside of like scenarios like that, it will basically automatically have the chance to immediately fire back, and that's just not what you want, right? And then of course, if you don't get into a situation where you can reverse, suddenly you're just stuck there and have virtually no chance of escaping because you're so slow. And that's why the Chieftain line is bad. Welcome to my TED Talk. Goodbye. Whatever. That was my TED Talk. Okay. 2 times the same line I think is too much in one video. So yeah, that goes for both Chieftains. That Mk.11 at least has mini optics, but I remember like I played a bunch of games with and I don't mean a deck game with this, right? Blue 4 armored. I use like LRM and focus on like using chieftains because I was like, 80 points, 19 armor is pretty good, and you have 14 armor, so you will not immediately die if something looks at you. AMX-40, for example, with 12 armor but also 19 AP, so that's pretty cool. But that speed, oh my, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying like they're utterly worthless tanks. They can certainly do some work. But once again, with the way the game is played these days, with how fast things tend to be, and it's like, the other thing is, of course, if you have an Jurgen or something coming in, good luck trying to evade that. If there's a bomber coming in, good luck trying to evade that. K1, S tier. Amazing medium tank. 17 armor is pogged for 90 points. 16 AP, 9 RPM is fairly low. Is certainly below average for the price, but you make up for that with armor, so you're more or less even with other medium tanks. You will struggle against heavy tanks at like long ranges, but like you're so good against medium tanks, IFVs, and you know you can very often just drive up into a forest and tank a shot easily and still survive and then get into safety or whatnot. It's very versatile. It's still cheap enough that you can afford like use it on a flank, and then it's just on low intensity flanks it's gonna be a huge wall for your opponent to deal with. It's just an amazing medium tank. It's just that it doesn't quite. It isn't. No. It is amazing, and I would basically use it in nearly all decks if I had it available to. But I don't think it's quite S tier. Why? It will struggle, as I said, against like heavy air tanks. As soon as you go into like 100 to 110 points, you have to 2v1 them. If you're on even ground, basically, right? The thing that really makes other tanks like the 84A so strong is that it can very often go toe to toe with like 110 point, 120 point tanks even, right? K1 most of the time cannot. It is incredibly strong once again, but I think if it came down to 84A versus K1, I'd probably in most decks go for the 84A. It also depends on other decks, right? But I think for me, just being, unless you're like really close, and that is sometimes hard to do on some maps, can just really struggle against heavy tanks. And the thing is, it's most of the time just not really noticeable because the decks it's mainly used in, which is Blue Dragons and Mixed Blue Mech, they both have such strong planes to deal with the heavy tanks, right? Which is why you don't really notice this. It is weakness, but if this was available in like, let's say, Red Dragons, right? Of course, Red Dragons would use this over all the other medium tanks it has, but I think the weakness would become more apparent. Again, I'm certainly not saying it needs a buff by any means. It's an amazing tank, borderline S tier. Once again, one of the units where I wouldn't be surprised, or I wouldn't necessarily argue too much with someone who said, oh no, this is S tier. But I don't think it is quite there. K1A1, and I think this is going to be the last one for this episode. You can already see, right, the bar is still on the left side here, visible, so it's going to be at least a 3-parter if I had to guess, probably even 4. K1A1, it's just a sad tank. It will still get double tapped by peace rounds. It will survive 30 AP, but like 140 points, 18 armor is very oof. Like the more expensive your tank gets, the more and more you want the armor, right? There's certain, how do I put this, right? Of course, armor is always nice. Of course, AP is always nice. And of course, I said it earlier, when it comes to cheap tanks, oh, they all are so squishy. Now and medium tanks, I was like, that extra armor point is more or less worthless. And now I'm again like, oh, it's so squishy. There's always like these thresholds kind of for prices. If you go at 140 points and you still get double tapped by peace runs at full HP, that's an issue. If you're at 95 points and you have 18 armor, okay, that's a different story. But 18 armor for 140 points, oh no, baby, what is you doing? Not a fan of this tank at all. There's a reason why it's very often even just plain skipped in Blue Dragons, and people just take 2 Q-Maru cards in a K1, and maybe like another Yonshiki below that. I mean, realistically speaking, I very much assume this is hard to justify, or nearly impossible. But I would have laughed if this was like an 18 AP 22 armor. Maybe it would be ridiculously strong for that price, but Two Dragons isn't exactly a top tier deck, but it would also be a unique tank, and it would be so cool flavor wise to have like a 22 armor 140 point tank, and then your super heavy only has 20 armor. I think it would be really interesting, really fun. Sadly, there's no tank like this. The closest thing there is like the Challenger line, the Challenger 1 line, Mark 1, really, with 17 armor and 19 AP, 17 AP and 19 armor. But yeah, it's very rare to have high-end tanks with more armor than AP. Unfortunately, I think probably also that just due to realism, but maybe also partially due to the way Eugen scales things. Maybe, you know, there's maybe like some sort of way to keep it. Don't want to say realistic because I'm pretty sure Wargame isn't particularly realistic if you want to really go down to it. But to keep the authenticity in a sense. But to in general scale up armor more, or rather scale down a P across the board. So maybe that'd be interesting to see how it would play out. But then of course you have the issue that, and then of course actually no, that would actually. The question is, would it hurt? I think it would make super heavies even stronger. For one, because you know, suddenly super heavies having 24 and 25 armor across the board would be ridiculous, kind of. But at the same time, if super heavies, that means super heavies would gain even more from being closer because we don't reach the 30 AP cap as much. But this is a whole different discussion. K1A1. I mean, 22 armor is nice, AP is nice, but like as soon as you get like around the 19 AP plus area, you have to keep in mind that all the tanks will deal the same amount of damage at point blank range, or like forest engagement ranges, right? Which are important engagements, very important. Of course, having that extra AP can certainly be nice because it means you will also, you know, gain that 30 AP at close ranges that aren't forests, right? Between forests, so very often it's like 500, 600 meter. It means that 21 armor AP and such will already reach a 30 AP threshold, where an M84A wouldn't. However, you get killed just so easily. And once you get like to this price range, your tank is a lot more than just an offensive killing machine like an 84A. You're a wall, right? That's why super heavies don't necessarily have to deal that much damage in order to be worth it. Just by being a wall and threatening your opponent and not making him push up, they can already give you so much value. The K1A1 just can't, because it's just, for the price, so squishy. And that's why it's gonna be in C tier. And that's gonna conclude this part of Tonk rankings. Not a whole lot of red 4 tanks. In fact, oh yeah, only the John Maholan, I believe. Yeah, only a lot of blue 4 tanks. That's gonna be the East German tanks with the KBZs very soon. But yeah, that's tanks part 1. Let me know what you think. If you're heavily disagreeing with something, let me know, of course. I'm gonna ignore it as always. I'm just kidding. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. If you have questions, of course, leave them below. And I'll hopefully see you next time. See ya.